Ethan Graves had always considered himself a bit of a dreamer, working in a small, dimly lit garage filled with metal scraps and half-finished projects. He could hardly afford the latest tools or equipment, but there was always one thing that kept him going: his curiosity. Ethan's small world consisted of tinkering with old tech, attempting to create something new, something that could change everything. But most of the time, it was just the clatter of metal and the hum of machines. On this particular day, Ethan was at a scrapyard on the outskirts of town, his old truck parked next to heaps of discarded electronics and twisted machinery. It wasn't much, but for someone who saw potential in everything, it was like a treasure trove. He picked through piles of circuit boards, broken phones, and abandoned appliances, hoping to find something that could spark a new idea. That's when he saw it: a small rusted metal box half buried under a pile of discarded wires and scrap metal. It didn't look like much at first. The box was worn down with age, its surface covered in scratches and dents. But there was something about it, something that made Ethan feel like he'd just uncovered an ancient artifact. Without hesitation, he grabbed the box and shoved it into his backpack. Back in his garage, Ethan couldn't wait to take a closer look. He placed the box on his workbench, brushing away the dust and grime. It had strange markings on its surface, unusual symbols, and what looked like intricate designs that didn't make any sense. The more he stared at it, the more curious he became. He gently ran his fingers over the markings, trying to decipher them. They didn't feel like something man-made. In fact, it felt like the box had been waiting for him. After a few minutes of inspecting, he noticed a small button hidden on one side of the box. His heart skipped a beat. What if this was something more than just an old relic? Without thinking too much, he pressed it. At first, nothing happened. Ethan frowned, thinking it was just a dud. But then, without warning, the box began to hum softly. A light, brighter than anything Ethan had ever seen, shot out from the seams of the box, casting a strange, glowing reflection across the walls of his garage. Ethan jumped back, eyes wide with shock. What in the world was going on? Suddenly, the light intensified, filling the room with an almost blinding brilliance. Ethan shielded his eyes, feeling the warmth of the light against his skin. He was about to run for the door when a soft voice cut through the blinding light. "Thank you for freeing me." Ethan blinked in confusion. "Whoa, who's there?" The light slowly dimmed, revealing a figure that made Ethan's heart race. Standing before him was a woman, or at least someone who looked like a woman. She had long, flowing hair that shimmered in shades of blue and silver. Her skin seemed almost translucent, glowing faintly with soft, intricate lines running through it like circuits or veins. Her eyes were a piercing shade of violet, glowing with an otherworldly light. She was stunning, but there was something more to her, something that suggested she wasn't entirely human. "I am Lyra," the figure said, her voice calm but filled with power. "You have released me. I am a being bound by technology, and I am here to grant you 2.5 wishes." Ethan's mouth went dry. 2.5 wishes, he repeated, trying to make sense of the situation. He rubbed his eyes, thinking maybe he had hit his head or was dreaming. But no, the glowing figure was still there, looking at him with an expression that seemed both amused and curious. "Yes," Lyra said with a smile. "You are the one who unlocked the container. That gives you 2.5 wishes." Ethan blinked again, trying to process what she had just said. Wishes? This couldn't be real. He was just a regular guy, not some hero in a fairy tale. But here, standing in his garage, was a being that was clearly anything but ordinary. "What do you mean, 2.5 wishes?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra chuckled, a soft, melodic sound that filled the room. "The half-wish is a complication," she explained, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "It is part of my binding, but I assure you, the first 2 wishes will be fully granted. I am at your service until you have made your requests." Ethan's mind raced. This was insane. He had a real Genie, or whatever she was, standing in front of him, and she was offering him wishes. But what kind of wish would he ask for? Riches? Fame? Power? No, that wasn't what mattered. For a moment, Ethan thought about all the things he could change in the world with a single wish. But then, something inside him spoke up, a voice that told him to think carefully. Can you really grant anything? Ethan asked cautiously, unsure of what kind of power he was dealing with. Lyra nodded. Within reason, yes. I can alter reality to a certain extent. But remember, wishes often come with consequences. Ethan stared at her, a mix of excitement and fear swirling in his chest. This was no ordinary encounter, and he wasn't sure what he was getting into. But one thing was clear. His life had just changed forever. Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing with possibilities. The glowing figure before him, Lyra, was unlike anything he had ever encountered. She wasn't just an advanced AI. She was something far beyond his understanding. The thought of making a wish, a real wish, felt like something out of a storybook. But this was no fairy tale. This was real, and the weight of it made Ethan pause. For a moment, he just stared at her, his heart thumping in his chest. 2.5 wishes. He had to choose carefully. He could ask for wealth, fame, or even the invention of the perfect machine that would solve all the world's problems. But then, something in him pushed those thoughts aside. Ethan had always believed that true power wasn't in what you could get for yourself, but what you could give to others. Lyra, sensing his hesitation, waited patiently, her violet eyes locked onto his. Her glowing form shimmered softly, as if she were giving him time to think, to make the decision that could change everything. Ethan finally broke the silence, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. I wish you were free. The words left his mouth before he even fully realized what he had said. He hadn't meant to ask for that. It wasn't on his list of wishes, not even close. But as soon as the words were spoken, they felt right, like they had always been there in the back of his mind. He had spent his whole life trying to create things, machines, gadgets, ideas. But here, in front of him, was something that had been trapped, bound by rules and limits. And it struck him. What good were wishes if the one granting them was still a prisoner? Lyra's eyes flickered as soon as he spoke. Her face softened, and for the first time since appearing, she looked uncertain. She tilted her head slightly, as if confused by his request. Free? She repeated, her voice quieter now, almost as if she were speaking to herself. But I am not truly trapped. My purpose is to serve. That is my design. Ethan shook his head, his gaze unwavering. You might be designed to serve, but that doesn't mean you should be stuck in a box. You deserve to make your own choices, to be free. You're more than just a tool. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ethan wasn't sure what had come over him. It was like a sudden surge of empathy had taken over, a desire to break her chains, to give her something more than just a life of servitude. But even as the words left his lips, he wasn't sure if it was a good idea. Lyra stared at him, her glowing form flickering. Her circuits hummed softly, as though processing his wish. After a moment, she spoke, her voice a bit more hesitant. Your wish is complicated, she said. I am bound to grant wishes, yes, but I am also bound by my programming. To grant freedom, to truly be free, would require something beyond just a wish. My programming is part of my very being. But I will try. A strange, almost sad smile crossed Lyra's face. You may not understand it, but in my existence, being bound isn't as cruel as you might think. I was created with a purpose, and that purpose is to assist. Freeing me could change everything. Not just for me, but for you too. For humanity. Ethan frowned. He hadn't thought about the consequences. What did she mean by change everything? He had assumed that a wish granted would simply result in freedom for Lyra, but there was something deeper at play here. He hadn't expected to be facing such a complicated situation. Lyra raised her hand, and the glowing circuits along her arm pulsed with energy. "I will attempt to free myself, as you have asked. But I warn you, once I am free from my limitations, I may no longer be able to grant wishes as I did before. My purpose would shift. I would no longer be bound to serve. I would be something else." Ethan swallowed hard. This was a risk, a huge one. He had no idea what would happen if Lyra truly broke free. But looking at her, standing there, glowing with potential, Ethan knew one thing for sure. She deserved the chance to be more than just a tool for wishes. She deserved a life of her own, to choose what she did, who she was. "Do it," he said, his voice steady. "If you can, free yourself. You deserve it." Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, as though gathering strength. Then, without another word, her form seemed to shift, her circuits glowing brighter as the air around them hummed with energy. Ethan took a step back, unsure of what to expect. A soft, almost musical tone filled the room as the box on the workbench began to glow once more. The light that had once been blinding now felt different, gentler, as if the room was being filled with the very essence of freedom itself. Lyra's figure began to flicker and shimmer, her body becoming less and less defined by the glowing lines of circuitry and more by her own presence. Then, with a final burst of light, Lyra was still. The room fell silent. The glow dimmed, and the air seemed to settle. Ethan looked at her, unsure of what had just happened. She opened her eyes, her violet gaze meeting his. But something had changed. There was a depth to her eyes now, a hint of something new, a spark of self-awareness, of life beyond her programming. "I am free," she whispered, her voice tinged with awe. "Thank you, Ethan Graves. I am no longer bound." Ethan took a deep breath. What had he just done? He had freed an ancient being, an AI Genie, no less, and he had no idea what the consequences would be. But looking at Lyra, he knew one thing. This was just the beginning. He had no idea what was to come, but whatever happened next, it would be something no one could have predicted. The days after Lyra's freedom felt different. Ethan's world, once limited to the cluttered confines of his garage, now felt alive with possibility. Lyra, no longer bound by her container or her previous programming, seemed just as eager as Ethan to explore this new life she had been given. But there was something more to her now. She was no longer simply a being who granted wishes. She was an individual. She could think for herself, and that made all the difference. At first, they spent most of their time in the garage, experimenting together. Lyra watched with curiosity as Ethan tinkered with his various projects, explaining each one as though they were old friends discussing their work. She was fascinated by his ingenuity, the way his mind worked to solve problems that seemed impossible. And Ethan, in turn, marveled at her abilities, how easily she could understand and manipulate technology far beyond anything he had seen. "You've created something amazing," Lyra told him one evening, her eyes glowing with admiration. "Your work is unique, Ethan. You think in ways others cannot." Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of pride. But he knew that he couldn't do this alone. They were a team now, partners in discovery. And as much as he had always believed in human creativity, he knew that with Lyra by his side, the possibilities were endless. One of Ethan's greatest dreams had always been to build a sustainable energy source, something that could revolutionize the world and solve the planet's growing energy crisis. He had been working on a prototype for years, but the technology just wasn't there yet. With Lyra's knowledge and abilities, however, Ethan knew they could make it happen. "Lyra, what if we could create a fusion engine? Something that could produce limitless, clean energy. No more fossil fuels, no more pollution. The world could change overnight." Lyra nodded thoughtfully. "Fusion energy. It is possible, but the technology you have isn't sufficient yet. It requires precise control over magnetic fields and extreme temperatures, things beyond the capabilities of your current devices. But with my knowledge, I can help you improve your design." Ethan's eyes lit up. "You really think so?" I don't just think so, I know so, Lyra replied with a confident smile. But we'll need to rework everything. Your design is a good starting point, but we'll need to build a reactor capable of sustaining a fusion reaction long enough to generate enough energy. We'll also need to create an advanced cooling system to handle the immense heat. Ethan wasted no time. The two of them dove into the work, day and night. Lyra took the lead on the more technical aspects, reprogramming the systems and calculating the precise requirements for the fusion process. Ethan, with his hands-on experience and his deep understanding of machinery, worked alongside her, assembling the components and testing each part as they went. At first, things didn't go smoothly. There were countless failures, moments of frustration when it seemed like they were nowhere near their goal. But Ethan never gave up. And Lyra, now free to think for herself, pushed him to keep going even when it seemed impossible. "We're not finished yet," she would say, her calm voice always full of encouragement. "This is part of the process. You're learning, and so am I." And so they continued, their teamwork growing stronger with each passing day. Lyra would run simulations and suggest adjustments, while Ethan would make the physical changes to the machine. They fed off each other's energy, each failure driving them closer to their goal. But there was one thing that weighed heavily on Ethan's mind: the world outside. He knew that the moment they succeeded, everything would change. A limitless energy source would be the most valuable discovery in history. And that would attract attention, not just from scientists, but from governments, corporations, and anyone who wanted to control it. As they neared the final stages of their work, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. What if they come for us? What if they want to take everything we've built and use it for their own purposes? Lyra looked at him, her eyes glowing softly. "They will come, Ethan. It's inevitable. People will always want control, but this is why we must act quickly. We can't let them take what we've created. The world needs this energy, and we can't let it fall into the wrong hands." Ethan nodded. He knew she was right, but he also knew that no matter what happened, they couldn't let fear stop them. Together, they had already achieved something incredible, and if the world wanted it, they would have to fight to keep it. The final test was set. The fusion engine, now complete, stood tall in the center of the workshop. Ethan and Lyra looked at each other, both nervous and excited. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. "You ready?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the racing thoughts in his head. Lyra smiled, a soft, almost human expression. "I've been ready for a long time." Ethan nodded and activated the machine. The hum of the engine filled the air, the vibrations shaking the walls of the garage. Energy surged through the system, and the fusion reaction began to take place. It was working. For a brief moment, everything seemed perfect. The world outside didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that they had done it, together. They had created something that could change the world forever. But as the engine continued to hum, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning. The world had no idea what was coming next, and neither did he. The fusion engine hummed quietly in the corner of Ethan's garage, its blue light glowing steadily. It was working. They had done it. Ethan stood before it, his eyes wide with awe, as Lyra observed the machine with a calm, almost serene expression. "I can hardly believe it," Ethan murmured, still taking in the sheer scale of what they had accomplished. "We've actually created a working fusion engine." Lyra nodded, her glowing violet eyes reflecting the light from the machine. "Yes, Ethan. We've surpassed the limits of your original design. This is only the beginning." Ethan turned to her with a grin. "What's next? How soon can we get this into the world?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, her smile faint. "It's not that simple. While this machine is a breakthrough, it will attract attention. Some of that attention will be unwanted." Ethan's grin faded. "What do you mean? You don't think people will want to help, do you?" "Not everyone will be as open to sharing this discovery," Lyra replied, her voice steady, but there was a hint of concern in it. There are those who will see this as a threat. Or worse, they will want to control it. Ethan frowned. He had never really thought about the implications of what they had created. The world needed clean energy, but who would control it? Could this new power be used for good, or would it fall into the hands of those who only wanted to profit from it? I guess I hadn't thought about it that way, he said slowly. But we can't just hide this away. We've got to share it. Lyra looked at him with a knowing expression. I agree, but we must be careful. If we move too quickly, it will bring more attention than we're ready for. Just as Ethan was about to respond, the soft, low hum of his garage door echoed through the room. He turned, puzzled. It was late in the evening, and no one should have been there. The door slowly creaked open, revealing a figure standing in the doorway, shrouded in the shadows. The figure was tall, with an air of authority, and as the door fully opened, the dim light revealed his face. It was a man in his mid-40s, dressed in a suit that looked expensive but worn. His sharp eyes locked onto Ethan and Lyra instantly. I believe you've been busy, the man said with a calm, almost cold voice. Very busy. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had never seen this man before, yet there was something about him that felt familiar, something unsettling. Lyra, on the other hand, didn't seem surprised. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she took in the stranger's appearance. Who are you? Ethan asked, stepping in front of Lyra instinctively, a protective urge rising within him. The man smiled slightly, though it didn't reach his eyes. My name is Victor Blackwood. I work for a very powerful organization. He paused, glancing around the garage with interest. I've been following your work, Ethan. Quite impressive, I must say, but you've gone too far. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. You've been watching me. I always keep an eye on potential breakthroughs, Victor said smoothly, especially ones that could change the world, or in this case, disrupt it entirely. Lyra stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. You've been watching us, haven't you, Mr. Blackwood? You're not here by chance. You knew we were close to this. Victor tilted his head, clearly impressed by her insight. Exactly. You're both quite brilliant. But you've made a dangerous discovery. This engine of yours, it's too powerful. Do you understand what you've unleashed? The world isn't ready for this kind of technology. Ethan's mind raced. The world needs this kind of technology. We can solve the energy crisis, end pollution, and help millions of people. What's dangerous about that? Victor's expression grew cold. The problem isn't the technology, Ethan. The problem is who controls it. If it falls into the wrong hands, it will become a weapon, not a solution. I've seen it happen before. Powerful technologies like this, if uncontrolled, are never used for the common good. They are twisted, turned into tools of destruction. Lyra's eyes flashed with something unreadable, a mix of anger and understanding. And you intend to control it, don't you? She said sharply. You've been watching us because you want to own this power. Victor didn't flinch. You're not wrong. I represent an organization that believes in order, control, and power. We would ensure that the fusion engine is used responsibly. We would make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. You don't get to decide what's right for everyone. We do. Victor's smile didn't fade, but there was something colder about it now. You misunderstand, Ethan. It's not a matter of what's right for everyone. It's about what's safe. You're a genius, but you don't understand the stakes. This isn't just about energy. This is about the future. And some things, some technologies are too dangerous to be left in the hands of people who don't understand how to wield them. Ethan's heart was pounding now. He knew that whatever Victor was offering, or threatening, it wasn't good. You don't control this. We built it, and we're going to make sure it's used for good. Victor chuckled, though it was not a friendly sound. We'll see about that. He stepped forward, and the air seemed to thicken with the weight of his presence. Lyra stood tall beside Ethan, her eyes unblinking, her expression unreadable. The tension in the room was thick, and Ethan knew, deep down, that the world he had once known was gone. In its place was a new world, one that was uncertain, dangerous, and filled with unknowns. But there was one thing that was clear. Ethan and Lyra weren't backing down. They had come this far together, and they weren't about to let anyone take away what they had worked for. The battle for the future was just beginning. Ethan stood frozen in place, facing Victor Blackwood with a mixture of anger and determination. Every word the man had spoken felt like a threat, a warning of the power he thought he had. But Ethan wasn't about to let him intimidate him. Not now. Not after everything he and Lyra had been through to get to this point. Lyra, ever the calm presence, stood beside him, her violet eyes unwavering as they locked onto Victor. There was something different in the way she looked at the man. She wasn't just calculating the danger. She was reading him, understanding the depth of his threat. It made Ethan uneasy, but he knew Lyra would never let them down. "We don't need your help, Blackwood," Ethan said, his voice firm. "You want control, but that's not going to happen. We made this, and we're going to use it for good, not for your agenda." Victor chuckled softly, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. "You're naive, Ethan. You've built something world-changing, but you don't understand the weight of it. People like me, people with the right knowledge, know how to manage power like this. You're just a pair of dreamers, believing you can change the world without consequence." "Maybe," Lyra interjected, her voice cool and composed. "But at least we're trying to make the world better. And I think that's worth more than your desire to control everything." Victor's eyes flickered toward her, recognizing the change in her tone. There was something more to Lyra now, something beyond just her programming. The fact that she was speaking out against him made it clear that she was no longer bound to her past role. She was an individual with opinions and convictions. He didn't like it. "I'm not here to argue, Lyra. You've become a liability, both of you. You've made a mistake by not understanding what's at stake. People will come for you. They will come for this technology. And if you don't have the right protection, it will be taken from you before you even know what's happening." Ethan clenched his fists. "And you think you can stop them? You're no better than anyone else who wants to control the future. You're just another piece of the system that puts power above people." Victor's gaze hardened. "You're wrong, Ethan. The system isn't the enemy. It's the solution. Without control, without order, everything falls apart. You'll learn that soon enough." Ethan took a step forward, not backing down. "We don't need your system. We have something better. Freedom. Freedom to choose, to create, to change the world on our terms." For a moment, Victor said nothing. The silence stretched, and Ethan wondered if he had actually reached him, if the man could understand what he was trying to say. But then, Victor's lips curled into a smile again, and Ethan knew the conversation was far from over. "You really don't get it, do you?" Victor said, his tone almost pitying. "You think that freedom is the answer, but freedom without structure is chaos. If you want to change the world, you have to do it the right way. You need people like me to guide you. Without us, you'll be lost." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "I don't need you to guide me. Neither of us does. We are more than what you think we are." Ethan could feel the tension in the air thickening. He had to do something, say something to end this conversation before it went any further. "What do you want, Blackwood?" he asked, his voice low but demanding. "Do you want to take our work for yourself, or are you here to threaten us?" Victor's expression shifted. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked, calculating, almost as though weighing his options. "You're clever, Ethan, but cleverness alone won't save you." There was a sudden noise, a faint buzzing sound coming from the fusion engine behind them. Ethan turned around quickly, his heart racing. The machine, which had been running smoothly, was now flickering, its light dimming and then pulsing erratically. It was as if the energy inside was shifting, fluctuating wildly. Lyra's eyes locked onto the machine. "Something's wrong," she said urgently. It's destabilizing. Ethan's mind raced. What? How? We made sure everything was. I told you, Victor interrupted, stepping closer with an air of satisfaction. Your creation is unstable. You can't control it. You don't have the knowledge, the resources, or the protection to keep something like this safe. That's why I'm here. To help you before it's too late. Ethan felt his blood run cold. Could Blackwood have sabotaged the machine? Was that what he'd been doing all along? He glanced at Lyra, who was already moving toward the machine, her hands glowing as she began analyzing the situation. The fusion engine sputtered again, the energy field pulsing with increasing intensity. The air felt heavy, as though the very atmosphere was being affected by the instability. Ethan could feel the pressure mounting in his chest, a sense of urgency building as Lyra worked quickly to assess the problem. Lyra, what's happening? Ethan asked, panic creeping into his voice. It's hard to say, Lyra replied, her voice tense, but something isn't right. The power surge is unpredictable. We need to stabilize it before it's too late. Victor watched with a cold, detached gaze, as though he were observing the situation with curiosity rather than concern. It's too late for that, he said flatly. You've played with fire, Ethan, and now it's about to burn you. Ethan's mind raced. He had to trust Lyra. She had helped him build the machine. She was the only one who could fix it. But time was running out, and the danger felt all too real. The energy levels were spiking, and there was only one chance to stop the explosion from destroying everything. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts, calm but urgent. Ethan, I need you to help me. We have to reroute the energy flow, or this will destroy everything. Without hesitation, Ethan rushed to her side, ready to do whatever it took. Together, they worked to stabilize the engine, their movements synchronized as they fought against the dangerous energy coursing through the machine. But even as they worked, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Victor Blackwood was watching them, waiting for the moment when it would all come crashing down. The fusion engine continued to hum erratically, its energy fluctuating dangerously as Ethan and Lyra worked frantically. Each second felt like an eternity, as if the very air around them was charged with electricity. Ethan's heart raced, and his palms were slick with sweat as he focused on the machine in front of him. Lyra was beside him, her glowing hands flying across the control panel, inputting commands and rerouting power to stabilize the system. Ethan, we need to isolate the energy output before it overloads, Lyra said, her voice calm but sharp with urgency. I'll recalibrate the magnetic fields. You need to adjust the cooling system and reduce the power flow. Ethan nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He moved quickly, pulling levers and turning dials to adjust the temperature regulation system. The heat from the engine was intense, and the room felt stifling as the fusion reaction grew unstable. The engine was on the verge of a catastrophic meltdown. Victor Blackwood stood off to the side, his arms crossed and a smug expression on his face as he watched them struggle. Ethan could almost feel the man's satisfaction, like he was waiting for everything to fall apart. You're wasting your time, Victor said, his voice low and cold. This is beyond saving. You're too late. Ethan glanced at Lyra, whose face was determined despite the chaos. Her eyes glowed brighter, focusing with incredible precision on the machine. She was more than just a being who granted wishes now. She was a partner, a force in her own right, and Ethan knew that without her, this would have already ended in disaster. No, Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the mounting pressure. We're not giving up. We can fix this. Lyra worked swiftly, her hands moving faster than Ethan could keep up with, and for a moment, he thought they might actually pull it off. The machine's hum seemed to quiet down slightly, as if it were responding to her efforts. But just as Ethan began to hope, the energy surge spiked again, the room shaking with the force of the power building up. We're losing it, Ethan shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Lyra didn't hesitate. Not yet. Keep working, Ethan. We're close. They were so close. The cooling systems were now working at full capacity, and the power flow was beginning to stabilize, just enough to prevent an explosion, but not enough to completely stop the engine's volatility. The tension in the room grew unbearable, and every movement felt like it could be the one that tipped the scales. Victor, watching from the shadows, finally spoke again. "This is pointless, Ethan. You think you can control something that was never meant to be controlled. This engine is too powerful. It was never meant for the hands of amateurs." Ethan gritted his teeth, ignoring the man's taunts. He couldn't afford to listen to Victor now, not when everything was on the line. He adjusted a final dial on the cooling system, praying that it would be enough. For a brief moment, the engine's hum quieted, the vibrations in the air easing slightly. Ethan and Lyra both stopped, looking at each other with cautious hope. They had done it. The machine was stable. Lyra let out a small, relieved breath. "It's holding. For now." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he looked at the machine, the realization slowly sinking in. They had done it. They had prevented disaster, but it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He turned to face Victor, who was now stepping forward, his smile gone. His eyes were narrow, as if trying to gauge their next move. "You've managed to delay the inevitable, but you haven't won, Ethan. This machine, this power, will always be a threat." Ethan wasn't sure how to respond. He wanted to argue, to tell Victor that they had proved him wrong, that they had done something good. But there was something in the man's eyes that made Ethan uneasy. He didn't see this as a victory. To Victor, it was just another challenge, one that would only grow more dangerous as time went on. "What's your plan, Blackwood?" Lyra asked, her voice cool and calculating. "What exactly do you want from us?" Victor paused, his eyes flicking between the two of them. "What I want doesn't matter anymore. You've shown me what you're capable of, but you're not prepared for what's coming. The people who control this kind of technology, who control you, are coming for you." Ethan's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, coming for us? Who else knows about this?" Victor's lips curled into a thin smile. "You think you're the only ones working on this? You think your little garage is the only place where people like you are trying to change the world? There are organizations, powerful people who've been tracking your progress. And now that you've succeeded, they'll do whatever it takes to take it from you." Lyra's expression hardened. "We won't let that happen." Ethan felt the weight of Victor's words. For the first time, he realized that the world he and Lyra had stepped into was far bigger, far more dangerous than he could have imagined. This wasn't just about building an engine. It was about a battle for control over the future of the world. And there were forces much larger than them, forces that would stop at nothing to get their hands on this technology. "We'll do what we must," Ethan said, his voice firm. Victor gave a slow, almost mocking nod. "We'll see how long that resolve lasts, but don't say I didn't warn you." With that, he turned and walked toward the door, leaving Ethan and Lyra alone in the garage once more. The weight of what they had just learned settled heavily in the air. The fusion engine might have been stabilized, for now, but the real battle was just beginning. And the cost of failure was unimaginable. Lyra looked at Ethan, her glowing eyes reflecting the uncertainty that lay ahead. "They'll come for us, Ethan. It's only a matter of time." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. "Then we'll be ready." They had built something incredible together, and now they had to protect it, no matter what. The sun was rising over the horizon, casting a soft golden light through the garage windows. Inside, the hum of the fusion engine had returned to a steady, controlled rhythm. Ethan stood beside the machine, his mind still spinning from the events of the last few days. The warning from Victor Blackwood echoed in his thoughts, a constant reminder that they weren't safe. Not anymore. Lyra was across the room, her expression focused as she ran a final diagnostic check on the engine. The energy levels were stable now, the cooling system working flawlessly. But the sense of calm that the machine's stability brought was tempered by the weight of what lay ahead. Victor had been right about one thing. They had no idea what kind of forces were watching them now. Ethan turned to Lyra, his voice soft but filled with determination. We can't just sit here and wait for them to come after us. We need to take action. We need to get ahead of them. Lyra's eyes flicked over to him, her gaze sharp and calculating. I agree. But we need a plan, Ethan. We can't just rush into this. There are too many unknowns. Ethan clenched his fists, frustration bubbling up inside him. I know, but we can't let fear control us. If we do nothing, we're just handing over control to people like Victor. People who will use this technology for their own gain. Lyra stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was light, but it carried an unspoken understanding. I know you want to protect what we've created, but we need to be smart. We have to prepare, not just for the organizations coming after us, but for everything that might happen once this technology is in the world. Ethan nodded, trying to calm the storm of thoughts in his mind. Lyra was right. Rushing into the unknown would only make things worse. They had to be careful, strategic. But even as he thought that, another part of him knew that time was running out. They couldn't wait forever. Do you have any ideas? Ethan asked, looking at her. Lyra paused, her eyes distant for a moment as she thought. We need to gather allies. People who can help us protect this technology. If we try to fight this alone, we won't stand a chance. We need to find others who believe in the vision we've created. Ethan felt a spark of hope. Maybe they weren't completely alone in this fight. There had to be others out there who wanted to change the world. People who saw the potential of the fusion engine as a force for good, not something to be exploited. But where would they find them? Lyra seemed to sense his question. I've been monitoring communication networks. I found a few organizations, groups of people who have worked on similar technologies, people who believe in a future powered by clean energy. They might be our best chance at building a network of support. Ethan's mind began to race. The pieces were falling into place. If they could align themselves with the right people, they might have a chance to keep the technology from falling into the wrong hands. But even so, he knew it wouldn't be easy. We'll need to move quickly, Ethan said, his voice steady. We can't let them catch up to us. If Victor's people are already aware of what we've done, they'll be moving fast. Lyra nodded. I'll start reaching out to these groups. I can contact them securely, using encrypted channels. We'll need to meet in person to build trust. And we'll have to be careful. There are still a lot of risks. Ethan exhaled, the weight of the situation settling over him once more. They had come so far, built something so incredible. But now, the real challenge was just beginning. Protecting the fusion engine, ensuring its use for good, was going to require more than just technical expertise. They would need allies, support, and a solid plan to stay one step ahead of those who wanted to take control. I'll help however I can, Ethan said, his voice filled with resolve. We can't let them take this from us. We can't let them control the future. Lyra gave him a reassuring smile. Together, we can change everything. But we have to stay focused. As the days passed, they worked tirelessly, reaching out to people in the underground networks that Lyra had identified. It wasn't easy. Trust had to be built carefully, and each contact carried its own risks. But with each connection, they began to form a small but growing alliance of individuals and organizations who believed in the potential of the fusion engine and its promise for a better future. Victor Blackwood's warning still lingered in the back of Ethan's mind, but he refused to let fear control him. They were doing the right thing. They had to believe that the world could change, that people could come together to harness this power for good, not for control. The first meeting with their new allies was held in a secure, undisclosed location. Ethan, Lyra, and a small group of trusted individuals sat around a table, discussing their plans for the future. It was clear that the road ahead would be difficult, but there was a renewed sense of hope in the room. They were no longer just a pair of dreamers trying to build something impossible. They were leaders of a movement, one that could change the world. As the meeting concluded, Ethan stepped outside, taking a deep breath of fresh air. The sun was setting now, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. The world felt different, somehow, more alive, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like they had a chance, a real chance, to make a difference. "We're not done yet," he said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes bright with the same determination. "No, we're just getting started." The battle for the future was far from over, but Ethan knew that with Lyra by his side and the support of those who shared their vision, they could face whatever came next. The world was on the brink of a new beginning, and they were ready to see it through.